Good news, everyone! This week, I got to sit down with internationally infamous trans activist Arden Hart, who's giving a speech this upcoming week at the NanoCon event in Nashville. Good news starts right now. Today, I'm joined by Arden Hart, head of production at The Line, host on the Transatlantic Call-In Show, and occasional host on an array of other programs, among a lot of other things. Arden, you've been extra busy lately. You've got a presentation coming up in Nashville in a few days, and not long ago, you gave a heck of a talk at American Atheists. You've been doing online advocacy and protests for a few years now. What motivated you to add these kinds of in-person presentations as well?
I used to, before I started TACUS, did a lot of protests and counter protests in the area that I was living at the time. And I just tend to be not great with crowds in general. So I kind of withdrew from that and was like, well, I like arguing. I like debate. I think I'm pretty good at structuring how I think about things. So let me try doing this sort of form. That kind of got me into TACUS. And now I think I'm at a stage where I've developed enough, I guess, credibility within the atheist movement that I've been hoping to kind of leverage that to convince, some of these organizational leaders and a lot of their members that this is a cause worth investing their time and, money in, not necessarily putting it in my pockets, but, investing in politicians or organizations that are doing good things for trans people. So that's kind of where my mind's at.
Sure, that makes sense. How do you see your impact moving things in that direction? Is it effective, do you think?
I think it's starting to be. I've definitely been making a lot of connections at a lot of these events and talking to other people who are interested and, want to feature, if not me, similar voices or similar ideas. And so I do think I am starting to get a sense of what the temperature is around a lot of the leadership at these organizations and kind of what they're looking for.
I've mentioned you've been doing TACUS for several years. How do you see the impact of that show and your other efforts online generally?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's changed a lot over the years. I think I had really hoped when we started that it felt like at the time there was a good momentum in a positive direction for trans rights. And I kind of was hoping okay, I think a lot of the policy stuff is kind of downstream of the sort of culture. And so if I can, help push sort of culture in a way of realizing not only are trans people your family members, not only should you care about them for emotional reasons, but all of the logic and science is on the side of trans people and transitioning as well. And so just kind of trying to widen the scope of what can help capture people to be allies for the trans movement. As to whether that's been successful, I don't really know. It's hard because at The Line, I feel like we're always growing and I'm always hearing from people who are like, hey, you really made a good impact on me. I've, been able to let go of a lot of bad ideas because of the things you say. But at the same time, we're watching trans rights be completely demolished by the administration that's in charge, and a lot of local state governments. And so it's kind of hard to feel like those messages mean much when you're looking at these outcomes. So I don't really know exactly how much of an impact I've had.
For what it's worth, the influence of TACUS has been reaching far and wide, at least across YouTube. I have people come into my chats when I'm talking about something else and not taking live debate questions and start spouting transphobic nonsense. And someone in the chat will usually say, you need to call the people on TACUS. Get out of here and go call them.
I will say that is my favorite advantage of TACUS is I know that for myself and a lot of other trans people, and this is kind of why Katie and I started it, to be honest, or at least a big part of why, was how often that we were all experiencing that you couldn't just really go about in public where someone knew you were trans without them thinking it was okay to start kind of interrogating you or asking you questions about trans rights. And I know a lot of people are open. That's great. But I kind of wanted to be able to say, like, here is a place that I specifically carved out for you, cis people, where if you have questions that may be inappropriate, or maybe you don't totally know everything, all the language, this is a place where you can direct that energy, and it's all okay. I am asking for it. That way I can kind of be like in my personal life, just say, call this. And that is all the energy I have to devote to it. You know, just go here. Don't interrupt this space.
Hell yeah. The fact that a lot of people are using it in a similar way, I think that's kind of wonderful. But the effect on the world is one thing, and the effect on you is another. You also deal with a whole lot of bullshit, especially when you're actively hosting. So how has the experience been for you?
Yeah. You know, I recently had someone kind of say to me that the whole framework of TACUS and a lot of our shows is kind of reactive, and reactive, not in like a negative way. This person was saying it with total love in their heart. And that, you know, there's nothing necessarily wrong with content that is reactive to some toxicity that's being put forward, but it can weigh on you more, right? And sometimes proactive content is less of a weight. And that's kind of been sitting with me, because I definitely feel the weight of the reactivity. I mean, you are very much in the throes of what is the discourse this week? You know, what new policy has come down from on high that is attempting to make our lives more difficult, push us further to the margins of society. And that can definitely weigh on you. I will say I have a great therapist, and I try my best to, when I'm not specifically engaging in these topics, to curate things that are not going to sort of bring me there, to really give myself that mental space. It doesn't always work. I definitely have harder, you know, I feel like I oscillate. I'll have like a month where I'm like really going through it and it's really difficult, and then I'll have 3 or 4 months where I'm great. So yeah, it definitely has had times where it weighs on me, but nevertheless, I persist. It's almost pathological. I feel like I can't help it. It's frustrating to sit there and know there's still so much more left to be said, and so many people who are just joining this conversation now, and to not feel like I would rather they land somewhere with me than with, you know, Blair White or like somebody else who's going to like really affirm a lot of their assumptions and prejudices about trans people.
I can empathize with this idea that you need to like push harder because other people need you, while at the same time trying to maintain healthy boundaries and take care of yourself, because if you burn out, you can't help anyone. It's a struggle, especially when it seems like the government itself is literally out to get you.
Yeah, for sure.
With all that said, do you think more people should get involved in advocacy?
Well, we definitely need more people. I feel like advocacy is always at a dearth of people, right? Like it's kind of the work will never be done. And so we're always in need of more people. That said, I've made the mistake before of being like, oh, we need your voices, like get out there and share your stories. But I also do think it's important to make sure people understand that like there are pros and cons to be weighed here, right? Like we've been talking about, the reactivity of it all can definitely wear on your mental health. You have to have pretty thick skin because people are going to be attacking you for every reason, all the time, even reasons that don't make sense. I can't tell you how many times somebody will try to insult me and they'll like reach for a feature trying to say it's masculine that I've like had surgery over. And I'm like, well, I know that's not true. You are just really going for the low hanging fruit of like, I know trans women might generally be insecure about this thing, so I'm going to try to use that, right? Like you really have to have thick skin because people will try everything to kind of bring you down. I mean, and that's true of like almost all content creators, but I do think content creators who are at those like intersections of marginalization are going to get it worse. You know, whether you are POC or queer or anything else like that. it definitely amplifies the hate that is just generally pervasive across the internet.
You first came to a lot of people's attention when you debated whether a tweet by Richard Dawkins was transphobic, which, given how things have escalated over the last few years, seems like small potatoes, though the tweet in question sent shockwaves through both the atheist and right-wing religious communities. It seemed, at the time, that one of the most famous atheists in the world was about to switch to Team Conspiracy Theory, and it was over his uninformed reactionary opinions on trans people. In other words, that was one big mess to step into. Why did you take that debate?
Well, I think The Selfish Gene was one of the first books that I read when I was like coming into my atheism. I had been an atheist for a little while, but I hadn't really like thought that deeply about it as like an identity, sort of like something that I was invested in. And as I was starting to feel like sort of more passionate about this part of myself, I was like, oh no, actually, I really care about this. And so Richard Dawkins was even formative, like for me, I think, as an atheist, and being like, I really care about science and truth, and like evaluating like these things that can still be controversial in society, like evolution and things like this. And so I think for that one in particular, it kind of upset me that he was falling for some BS. And I was like, wow, like somebody who I looked up to as an intellectual figure is really kind of betraying me on an issue, even, a little parasocial there. Obviously, Richard Dawkins is not betraying me personally, but he's sort of betraying reason in that sense. And that kind of was what felt like betrayal to me. And to watch so many people defend him didn't really make sense to me, because I was like, listen, generally speaking, I don't view calling someone transphobic or transphobia as something that is like the end of your career per se, right? Like I want to be able to talk about these things. Like I think we all grew up in a society that was probably transphobic, probably racist. And so a lot of us are going to carry those ideas, but it's a matter of what you do with it, right? Like, do you recognize it when called out and try to like unpack that and figure out where that comes from and work to be a better person? Or do you double, triple, and quadruple down? And that was kind of what I was hoping, was that, by appealing to reason on the things that Dawkins was stepping in, was that he could be like, oh, wow, I had said this, but you know what? I actually realized that was a bit of a mistake. And I think I was just uninformed. I appreciate people who were able to kind of help me understand the error in my thinking. And I, will do my best to do better on this issue in the future. Unfortunately, the exact opposite has happened. And yeah, it is kind of baffling to see, really. But that was kind of my hope, was that, like maybe I could be the one to save Dawkins or something, however naive that may be.
It would have been really cool if it worked, though.
Right. It's kind of going back to this, like, it's really hard to know how much of an impact you really had when you're engaging in these spaces. You see, tens of thousands of people watching a given video, but you never really get real-time data on how your impact on them is. You just get these messages here and there, comments, and hope that the totality of it all is a net positive.
In an interview shortly after that debate, you said something that especially resonated with me. You were talking about your early transition and how you felt incredible anxiety about very simple things, like going to the grocery store. I had a very similar experience. The first time I went to the store, I was sure I was going to be murdered in the parking lot before I even got to the doors. And I suspect a lot of trans people go through something like that. What do you wish someone had told younger you back then to help get through that time?
Obviously, there's a little bit of privilege that comes with this, so I hope people can take this with a bit of a grain of salt. But most people are so wrapped up in their own life and their own story and their own experiences that no matter how freakish you might actually look, I think we tend to think the worst of ourselves. So I was really worried that I was like, oh, I think I must look like a total clown kind of mentality was what was in my head. Even if that were true, most people didn't really care. They were trying to get their groceries and get home. Then they got to pick up their kids from the work. And I'm sure their husbands aren't really helping out with the dishes around that. You know what I mean? Like they've got their own lives and their own stories going on, where a person in the grocery store who maybe looked like a man wearing a dress, is that really going to take up a lot of their time on their day? I don't actually think so. And even if I was a freak, even if I was a man in a dress, does that mean that I don't have the right to go to the grocery store and take up space in society? Like, I'm not hurting anyone. So, like, what is so wrong with me being exactly where I was at in transition? And that was kind of what helped me kind of push over the edge to just go in and get it done.
On to the future. The Nashville Nones Convention is one of the largest secular events in the eastern U.S., if not the whole country. What can you tell us about what you have planned for this time?
Yeah, so I mean, it's largely going to be similar to the talk that I delivered in Minneapolis, but I will say I just recently had to do the same talk in Cincinnati, and I had to do it in 20 minutes. And the advantage of that was I think I was able to boil down some of the most important ideas into some really succinct, sort of phrases. And so I'm hoping to kind of adapt my talk with some of those lines, because I think they had a little bit more punch, a little more delivery on kind of the core message that I was trying to send home with that. Because we spend so much time doing these like logical takedowns. We can do all this work to show you all the reasons why biological sex isn't really binary, even if it were the same as gender, right? But I'm not sure that really matters, especially to the people we're trying to convince. And so I feel like I've been able to sort of distill the core of what I'm trying to communicate in this talk a little bit more efficiently. And I'm hoping that will leave room for me to expound more on kind of the core ideas that I'm delivering.
That would be really cool, because we all have to do that particular fight. Like, well, actually, sex isn't binary, even though it's a red herring, because it takes us off into the weeds to go deal with the biology of gametes and other whatnot, instead of what we're actually trying to talk about.
Yeah.
But we do get a lot of static from some people within the secular movement, because they don't see the connection. They say, why are you bringing your politics into my politics? And, secular advocacy, I should clarify that secular does not necessarily mean atheist, but everyone, inclusive of all religions as well as none. How do you see secular advocacy as related to trans advocacy?
That is a great question. I think for me, a lot of the core issues that we care about as secular people have to do with the sort of encroachment of religion on our daily lives, right? When we see the 10 commandments being put in schools, we as secular people, largely, generally speaking, tend to kind of balk at that. Like, you have the right to be Christian. I support your right to be Christian. But when you are putting the 10 commandments up in schools, you are telling every atheist, every Muslim, every Jewish kid in that school that thou shalt not put any false gods before me. You are telling them that this belief system is superior to you. And that's inherently kind of dehumanizing. And I think we all can get behind that. And when I look at the source of anti-trans sentiment, to me, it seems to come from the exact same place. While I understand that secular people have, in many cases, including Sam Harris and Dawkins and Jerry Coyne and even more to speak of, they have sort of jumped on some of these bandwagons. Ultimately, I think the policy prescriptions that follow from those sort of beliefs, like that we should have biological sex binary protected spaces, those are rooted in the same sort of Christian nationalist ideology. Like, those are the people who are drafting the laws as solutions to that. So, like, our enemies are the same. And I think we would be so much more efficient at combating our goals if we were all willing to work together. You know, a rising tide is going to lift all ships. So why are we not bringing our voices together? Why are you instead wanting to fight me on whether or not I am ontologically a woman? Like, I don't care, you know, like, that's so besides the point. My rights are being taken away. Your rights are being taken away by the same people for the same reason. So why don't we link arms and fight these people together? We are so much stronger in numbers, you know, like, the human capacity to work together, I think, is a compounding effect. Two people working together don't just have 2 times the fighting power. They have like 3.5 times the fighting power. And then when you bring like 100 people together, you have way more than 100 times the fighting power. So I want us to recognize that, you know, to appeal to a Christian, because I'm kind of on a bit of an interfaith allyship kick lately. You know, I think we're really in like a top-down versus bottom scenario here, and all of the non-religious people are on the bottom together. So let's fight together so we don't have to be on the bottom, because there's no reason that it has to be this way. In fact, I think our Constitution is designed to not allow it this way, but they want to change that.
I think it's really important to make clear to people that whatever propaganda you may have been sold, we are all fundamentally on the same side, whether it's a trans person's right to live as they need to, or a cis woman's right to get an abortion, or whatever else. It's all our rights to live our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I'm really, it's hard to know, because again, I don't really see the real-time effects of our sort of dialogue, but I know on TACUS, and generally speaking in my activism, I've really been trying to appeal to this sort of rhetoric of freedom, because I mean, I really believe it. Like, you know, kind of one of the ways I end my talk is talking about, I don't want to prescribe an ending point for kids who are transitioning. I want them to have the freedom to make the decision for themselves, whether they detransition but stay the most effeminate cis man you've ever seen, or whether they are a trans man who's a drag queen, or a trans woman who works on cars. I don't care what the outcome is, because I want you to have the freedom to be you, as long as you aren't harming anyone else. I cannot fathom what benefit is gotten from drafting laws that take away our freedom to be who we are, when there are so many much more pressing issues that are affecting all Americans. You know, we're seeing levels of wealth inequality like never before, but nothing's being done to address that. Why is, if, you know, the fraction of time that's being spent on trans people versus helping working class Americans is so out of whack based on the need. Even if we were all of the things that they say we are, it still wouldn't make sense to be spending this amount of time and effort to legislate against our lives.
Anything to block out a certain former financier who definitely didn't unalive himself.
Yeah.
Now for everyone's favorite part. How are the critters?
They are pretty good, although I will say we actually had a really unfortunate instance recently. We had a friend who is getting out. We weren't super close to him. He was another vendor. I actually had my suspicions about him, and we bought a couple of animals from him, and they turned out to have mites, which is a usually not fatal thing. It can really severely dehydrate your animals, but so we're just having to go through extensive work to take care of all of our animals right now, and to be very careful about what tools we're using in which room, you know, making sure if we're spending a lot of time in this room, we shower after before we enter any other of our reptile rooms. And so it does exacerbate our time schedule a little. And we're actually, in lieu of moving, considering pretty severely downsizing our collection over the next few months. once we've gotten these mites treated and they've been eradicated for longer than like 30 days, probably closer to 2 months, we're going to start offloading a lot of our collection actually, but mostly just because it's impossible to move with animals. And there are lots of people in this area who I know who are great keepers, who are phenomenal with all of these animals that I think would probably give them great homes. So we will likely be letting go of a lot, but the ones that we're keeping, the ones that I'm absolutely in love with, like my tree skinks back here, they're doing great. I'm waiting on one of them has been pregnant a couple times, or gravid, as we say in the reptile world, over the last like 4 months. And I'm waiting for babies to pop up. I'm really hoping I just walk in here one day and there's just like tiny little skinks walking around on the back wall. So that'd be really cool, because there's not a lot of captive bred of this species in the hobby in general. And so that's part of why I wanted them, because I love the species more than anything. And I'm like, I want people to be able to have captive bred, members of the species and not have to contribute to wild capture and things like that.
Little baby skinkies.
They're so cute. I would get one out now, although getting them back in is sometimes a chore. We don't really get to handle an emerald tree skink. They kind of handle you. They decide when they want to come out. They go where they want to go. And when they're ready, if you kind of like put an arm back in, they will decide when they go back in. But you can't grab one and put it somewhere like you can a bearded dragon. They don't work like that.
I've known a few critters like that. Particularly parrots could be awfully stubborn and recalcitrant.
Yep.
See Arden at NanoCon this weekend. Visit nanocon.rocks for tickets and info, or catch her on YouTube on Q&A Live, on her own channel at The Arden Hart, and popping up a few other places from time to time. All her links will be in the description. Thank you, Arden, for talking with me today and for all the crazy number of things you do. It means a lot to a lot of us.
Thank you so much for having me, Ember. I appreciate it.
If you enjoy content like this, be sure to subscribe. Transpositions Weekly is the first and only weekly trans news show in the universe, and we need your help to keep the show going. Contribute at patreon.com/thetranspositions. Make sure to share this video to let people know we're here, and tell us what stories matter to you by joining the community on Discord. Discord, of course, is where the memes live, and our meme of the week was posted by Titan Uranus. And if your gender is a signifier of certain doom for the patriarchy, join us. Also, if you have good news concerning trans people you'd like to see reported on, then tell us about that in the Discord as well. For the Transpositions, I've been Ember Belrad.